Watch, a watchdog program for social, economic, political, and cultural issues here in New York City. I'm Jeff Simmons, your co-host for this morning, and joining me today is a very special guest in the studio, our co-host, my friend and advocate and attorney, Yetta Kurland. Good morning, Yetta.
Good morning, Jeff. Good morning, everyone.
It's wonderful to have you here in Brooklyn at WBAI 99.5 FM. And before we get to our guests, we've got two exciting guests today. I'd like to remind you that it is WBAI's Fall Fund Drive. Please call and pledge at 516-620-3602 or go online at give2, that's the number 2, WBAI.org. Our two guests today, first up will be in just a few moments, Andrew Gounardes, candidate for state senate here in Brooklyn. And then later on in the second half of the show, Manhattan Borough President Gale Brewer. So again, it is fall fundraising season. There are a number of premium items online as well that you can check out. And a few that we do have for you, if you check out, are some tickets to 3 different shows at Flushing Town Hall in December. One is a family show and 2 other global performances. And we also have a book, The Rise of the Alt-Right, a fascinating book. We had the author, Thomas Main from Borough College, on last week. This is a book about the rise of the alt-right, all if you go online. So we're going to bring up our first guest in a moment, and that is Andrew Gounardes. Andrew, who is from Brooklyn, and let me just find my notes right here. Here we go. Andrew, who is from Brooklyn. Hold on, I'm just missing a piece of paper right here. Let's just get that over. Where did that go? Here we go. There we go. Our first guest is Andrew Gounardes, candidate for the state senate in the 22nd district, which covers Bay Ridge to Marine Park. And he hopes to give Democrats an edge in the chamber since Republicans now hold a 1-vote majority. Born and raised in Bay Ridge, Andrew has worked in the public and nonprofit sector. He was an aide to council member Vincent Gentili, worked for a Citizens Committee for New York City, and currently is counsel to Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams. He's also served on Community Board 10. Now, full disclosure, we also wanted to give both candidates in this race a chance to be on the show. So I did reach out by phone, email, online as well, and through even a tweet to invite his competitor Marty Golden on the show today. But despite those repeated efforts, did not hear back. And also one other point of disclosure, prior to stepping in as a co-host of this show several months earlier, I also did give Andrew a small contribution. Andrew, welcome to City Watch.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. How are you? Hey, Yetta. How are you guys?
Good. How are you?
Good morning. So, Andrew, first give our listeners a snapshot of your background and experience.
Well, you covered the basics in my bio, but I'm born and raised in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, spent almost my entire life here. I'm the general counsel for the Borough President's Office. I've been a public service lawyer for my entire career. I'm also a co-founder of a neighborhood nonprofit called Bay Ridge Cares. We were founded after Superstorm Sandy in the wake of the storm, and we cooked 25,000 hot meals for people in 6 weeks. And today we operate almost like the neighborhood Red Cross. So God forbid you have a house fire or unexpected medical emergency, you need some assistance or need some help, financial or otherwise. Bay Ridge Cares is there. Your neighbors are there to help you out, neighbors helping neighbors. And I've also been very involved in grassroots advocacy around pedestrian safety in New York City. And part of the work that I did with some local pedestrian safety groups in Bay Ridge helped lead to the successful implementation of the first citywide pilot program for speed cameras in school zones 5 years ago. That's been a topic of conversation this past year. That program has since expired, but I was really proud of that work that we did 5 years ago and hope to renew that if and when I get to Albany.
Great. Hey, Andrew, listen, I know this is your second run against Golden. You did fairly well. I think it was back in 2012.
Yes.
You're up against obviously an incumbent, a well-known incumbent. What is your path to victory, and why are you going to win this time?
It's a great question. We did really great 6 years ago. No one thought we could do better than 30%. We got just under 43%. So I was really proud of that effort. This time around, I think for so many of us, politics has really changed. People are more active and more engaged, and they're realizing how important local government and local politics actually is. So it's not just about responding to what's happening in the White House or in D.C., but it's a realization that the potholes on our block or, the unreliable nature of our subway system, it has a direct connection to what's happening at City Hall and in Albany and all forms of local government. And so the issues that I'm campaigning on are some of the same issues that I campaigned on 6 years ago. They've just gotten worse. Pedestrian safety, mass transit accountability, affordable housing, affordable health care. They've just gotten so much worse, and people are now paying attention to that in a much greater way. And we're going to win because this is a 2-to-1 Democratic district. Even though Marty Golden is a conservative Republican, this is a district that Democrats win time and time and time again if they're able to run smart, strong campaigns. And I'm very proud of the fact that we have built probably the broadest and strongest coalition ever assembled for a Southern Brooklyn State Senate campaign.
That's great.
We've unified the entire district, gotten community support from every corner of the district, great support from, progressive labor unions and even some of the more conservative labor unions as well, because I think there's a realization that working class people and middle class families are under attack now in all forms of government, and we really need to step up, fight back, and protect ourselves.
I think you made
That's why I think.
Go ahead.
Sorry?
Go ahead, Andrew.
I said that's why I think that we're in a good place, and that's why I think we have a lot of momentum and a lot of energy on our side, and we are outworking our opposition. We're out knocking on doors every single day. We've knocked on more than 100,000 doors in this campaign. Wow. We're just out there everywhere, and that's what I think is going to carry the day.
And I think you made a reference a couple of times to kind of what's happening on a national level. How has that impacted your constituents, your community, in terms of this race that you're holding now on a state level, and also how has the change in politics in Albany impacted it, the absence of the IDC, et cetera, et cetera?
Sure. So, I think my district, and this might surprise some people who don't spend a lot of time in Southern Brooklyn, 40% of my district are populations of color. It's a huge immigrant base in Southern Brooklyn, people from all over the world. And when they see a person in the White House in the Oval Office and they see a Republican Party that is so hell-bent on declaring war on immigrants and on, passing the Muslim ban, separating children at the borders, denying access, entry to refugees in the country, and even going so far as to try to take away rights from, green card holders and legal residents in the United States, it sends a chilling effect to all of our immigrant communities, especially the 40% who make up my district. And so that's where the need for active leadership at the state level becomes so important. And that's why, that's one of my campaign platforms is to have a whole robust agenda just on, immigration, new Americans, and make sure that we are, not only protecting immigrants and letting them feel safe in our communities, but B, also making sure that they have access to the same opportunities that the rest of us have, and making sure that everyone who lives here has a shot at that American dream. So there's definitely a direct connection between D.C. and here.
And what's interesting, Andrew, is just a few days ago, a Quinnipiac poll on the governor's race had basically ranked the issues that were of concern to voters. And immigration was the highest ranked category among non-whites. But among whites, I believe education might have been equivalent or a little higher, but taxes and the economy were up there. So at a very granular level, what are you hearing in the district are like the key issues that people are focused on that are going to bring them to the polls on November 6th?
Yeah, so, aside from hearing about some of the immigration issues, the key issues that I hear from my constituents, knocking on doors, and these are the same issues that I actually announced my campaign on last November, so I think we're doing something right, is pedestrian safety. Huge, huge, huge concern for people in my district. You go onto Facebook or social media any single night, and you'll see comment after comment after comment about speeding cars in the neighborhood, lack of traffic safety, lack of traffic enforcement. And it's not just the issue of speed cameras in school zones, though that is obviously a big part of it. It's the idea that people can be on the road and have driving records as long as a CVS receipt and still have their license and still be allowed to drive and be a danger to others. So pedestrian safety is a big concern for me. The state of our subways and buses, I know everyone talks about it. Everyone complains about it. I take the subway every day to work or to get around the district. There's a lot of issues at stake with our mass transit system. But what I think the biggest issue I hear about from people is that they're frustrated about the lack of accountability between the MTA and the riders, the paying customers. And so I'm actually campaigning on a platform to change that by giving riders a voting seat on the MTA board. Right now, we just have a non-voting representative, which I don't think goes far enough. I think it's important to us that we are able to have a say on the priorities and, most of all, the budget of the MTA. So we have some skin in the game. So that's a big concern that comes up as well.
And you're talking about transit, so I'm curious about certain issues, what your stance is for our listeners. What's your view on congestion pricing?
Congestion pricing provided two caveats are met. Number one, any revenue generated has to go wholly and solely into mass transit improvements. That's the only way that we're going to convince people who might be skeptical on the idea that it's in the best interest of all of us, and it's just the right thing to do because we need so much investment into our public transportation system. And number two, if we're going to increase fees, get access to parts of the city, we have to also look at some of the outer borough bridge tolls. You know, I live a stone's throw away from the Verrazano Bridge. I have family in Staten Island, like so many here in southern Brooklyn do. It costs $17 to cross that bridge. That's obnoxiously, ridiculously criminal.
Cost prohibitive.
You know, we have to lower these outer borough bridge tolls and have more equity across the city because it's really, really unfair.
Yeah. Andrew, what's your position as we're asking on these issues? I think Marty Golden is still anti-marriage equality. Is that correct? And what's your position on marriage equality?
The last I heard, Marty Golden was still opposed to this. And as some of your listeners might recall, he actually led the opposition to marriage equality in New York State and went so far as to say that his constituents don't care about it. And he actually introduced the state version of the Defense of Marriage Act into the state Senate. So really an enemy of equality. Just last night I was talking to some folks, and it dawned on me that I kind of started my political activism back in southern Brooklyn, hoping to organize a rally in support of marriage equality in front of Marty Golden's office 7 years ago.
Yep,
so
I remember
that was a great rally we had, and that was kind of my. I've always been involved in my community, but that was really my first political action. I think in my since I came back from living in D.C. for school and work. So that was equality is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. I think it's incredibly important, and marriage is the first step. There's so many other issues on the agenda that need to get addressed to make sure that we're treating everyone with fairness and dignity and respect.
Yeah. Charter schools, should the state lift the cap?
I don't think right now we need to be lifting the cap. I think that we have, we have 1.1 million public school students that we should be really prioritizing and focusing on, and making sure that all of our public schools are, providing a world-class education. And as we see, for all of our best efforts, we're still falling short of that mark. So that's really where my focus and my priority is, and making sure that we have the strongest public school system in the country.
And legalization of marijuana, your stance?
I'm open to legalization. My first priority actually is to decriminalize it first. I think that the conversation on legalization has to have multiple parts to it about appropriate regulation and financing and taxing, all this stuff. That might take a while to sort out, but I think the more important thing that we should focus on is decriminalizing it. This way people, predominantly people of color who are the ones getting busted for this, are not being put in jail. That is really the problem that we should be addressing immediately. And then we can have a more thoughtful and thought-out conversation about full steps towards legalization.
What's your what's your position on New York as a sanctuary city?
So, sanctuary city, I think, has a lot of different meanings to a lot of different folks. Essentially, it's the idea that our own local law enforcement should not be turning over personal information to federal immigration authorities. And so, in that vein, I support the Liberty Act, which would prevent New York State law enforcement authorities from turning over that information. I think it's a public safety matter. We want everyone who lives in our communities to be able to trust the public safety system and the criminal justice system, and be able to trust that they can come forward and talk about issues that they see in their communities, and talk about crimes that they witness, or be able to use the courthouses to adjudicate their rights. And when they are afraid to do that because of their immigration status, it makes all of us less safe.
Yeah.
So, Andrew, one issue that I had been working on with EMS workers, Marty Golden had stood with them at a press conference recently, two of the unions, 3621 and 2507, they were urging the mayor's office to support unlimited sick time for EMS members who are affected by their work at Ground Zero. And Yetta, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I gather, there had been a push for them to be included, but the city had gone to the state to urge legislators to kind of carve out New York City, so New York City EMS workers would not be eligible for this, whereas EMS workers who would have been who had been ill because of working at Ground Zero from outside of the city would be covered and allowed to have unlimited sick time. What is your position on this?
Look, I think anyone who served time at Ground Zero on that pile, on the bucket brigade, helping to, do rescue or recovery or cleanup from that, from the 9/11 tragedy, deserves to have every single right and privilege afforded to them. These are people who are unsung heroes, and we should not be, stiffing them pennies on the dollar, and we should be giving them everything that they are due. They've given their lives to the city. Some literally and some figuratively, and they should be treated with that respect.
And obviously, earlier this week, well, even continuing today, there's still a lot of media attention around the protest and counter-protest involving the Proud Boys. And you had issued a very strong statement this week about one of Marty Golden's staff members. Can you explain for our listeners the situation and your position?
Sure. So everyone knows what happened with the Proud Boys last weekend, really, opening riots in the city of New York. These alt-right, far-right figures, they were invited to come to the Metropolitan Republican Club by a member of Marty Golden's campaign staff. The gentleman on Marty Golden's staff who's been employed for him for several months, who helps run his campaign office, was the one who arranged for Gavin McGinnis to come to the city, and also, was part of that whole event. And then Marty Golden basically doubled down and said, "Look, he's a friend, and I stand by him absolutely, 100%." And so I issued a statement calling for him to be fired. And if this was a one-off incident, it could be understandable. But this follows a pattern of behavior where Marty Golden has employed people who have shown sympathies with the far right. Earlier this year, I called for the firing of another staffer of his who ultimately was fired for making comments on social media comparing the students from the Parkland shooting, David Hogue and others, to the Hitler Youth. I mean, really just disgusting and really just awful statements. And if you are going to be working in public service, regardless of that, as a human being, you shouldn't be saying those things, period. But especially if you're going to be on the public's dime and on the public payroll, you should not be inciting that type of hateful language and behavior. So this is a pattern for Marty Golden and his staff. And you know what? Enough's enough. He should distance himself from these figures. He should do the right thing and fire these staff members who, have connections to the far right and to the alt-right. And he should do the right thing by his community. He has yet to do so, and we're going to continue to push him to do it until he exceeds our request, demands.
So, Andrew, I want to lighten it up for just a few moments. Being a former aggressive investigative reporter at a few New York City outlets, I always find the sources. So last night I spoke to a very good source about you. I will not tell you. I will not tell you whether it is a younger sibling of yours, but I'm going to ask you a few true or false questions now.
Oh, God.
True or false?
I'm going to now regret everything I said to my sister ever, aren't I?
True or false? You were a big Spice Girls fan.
I mean, who wasn't when they were 11 years old, right? It's true.
Okay. When you were punished as a child, you were not allowed to read.
That is a true statement. My parents took my books away from me to punish me, and that was the worst thing they could have done to me.
You were a longtime subscriber to the Civil War Times.
Also true. I am a Civil War history nerd, so that is a very true statement.
One of your favorite movies that you would watch after school, I believe on VHS. Yetta, that since you're so much younger than me,
I don't know what that is.
I still have an 8-track player at home.
So, yeah.
One of your favorite movies was Gettysburg.
True. Again, in line with the Civil War theme. It's a fantastic movie.
Any quotes any lines you could quote from it?
I mean, I could probably, if you gave me a couple seconds to reboot the tape in my head, I could probably recite the entire film for you from start to finish. but it is, for those who haven't seen it, an incredibly powerful depiction of the Battle of Gettysburg based on Michael Shara's book, The Killer Angels. Really fantastic film with some great actors as well. Martin Sheen, Jeff Daniels, Tom Berenger, etc. Great movie.
I understand that you were so religious in following this that when your family even visited Gettysburg, you didn't need a tour guide. You led the tour.
That is also true.
So finally, true or false, you were the high school mascot dressed up as a bear at Fort Hamilton.
Well, true and false. The high school mascot for Fort Hamilton, we are the Fort Hamilton Tigers. And dare I say, I was probably the best mascot in the history of Fort Hamilton High School.
Humble brag.
Yeah, just humble brag. I mean, if I had to admit to it, I might as well own it. Yeah. And that came about. I was in the student government program, the student leadership program, and one day I walked into the student government office, and our advisor said, "Andrew, what are you doing tomorrow? There's a football game." I said, "I don't know. What am I doing tomorrow?" He threw a garbage bag at me with the mascot costume. He goes, "You're wearing this," and I had no choice. So I wore the costume, and then it worked out well, and I stuck with it for a while. So fun high school memory.
So we've got about 2 minutes left, Andrew. I understand you have a big rally or an event happening a little later today?
Yes, we actually have 2 rallies happening today. In about a half hour or so, we're going to be joined by our next Attorney General here in New York, Letitia James, for a big rally and day of action to support both her and my campaign. And we're going to be joined by some city council members, including Costa Constantinides from Astoria, as well as my own city council member, Justin Brannon. And then later on this afternoon in our Bensonhurst office, we're going to be rallying with CUNY professors. And we're going to have a rally talking about CUNY funding and just higher education in general and why it's such an important investment for us to be making. And that should be a great day as well.
And as we wrap up, how can people learn more about you and your campaign?
Visit my website at andrewgounardes.com or find me on Twitter or Facebook at @Gounardes. And there's no shortage of ways that you can get in touch with our campaign, and we'd love to hear from everybody.
Andrew Gounardes, thank you very much for joining Yetta and me this morning on City
Thank you,
Watch.
guys.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Thank you.
You too. Thanks. Interesting.
So again, you are listening to WBAI 99.5 FM. I am Jeff Simmons, and my co-host this morning is the lovely Yetta Kurland, who we're going to get to know in just a few moments. You can also listen to us at streaming live at WBAI.org. Also want to point out that tomorrow, there's an event I thought listeners would want to know about, the 2018 New York City Haitian Day celebration at the Brooklyn Museum. Council member Matthew Eugene is a key sponsor of this, and the evening, which honors the significant role of Haitians in U.S. history, will feature musical guests, dancers, an awards ceremony as well. This is from 7 to 10 tomorrow, Sunday, October 21st, at the Brooklyn Museum at 200 Eastern Parkway. So, Yetta, tell us a little about your background and why you're qualified to be a co-host today.
Well, because I've known you for a long time, because I'm interested in politics, but I also was a host of Yetta Kurland Live at WWRL for several years. Is that your competitor? I shouldn't say.
Everyone's a competitor.
That's a tragic outlook on life, Jeff.
So, but you and I also have worked when I was a reporter.
Yeah.
You and I had worked on several cases, and I remember you do a lot with civil rights. You do a lot with labor as well. Mm-hmm. And there was a case you had worked on with female firefighters.
The Monroe matter, yeah. Back in, I think that was, it's finally ended in 2000, I want to say 13. But you had helped us with that matter.
What was the matter in the resolution?
It was a group of female EMS workers who were alleging unfair promotional practices within the FDNY because they were on the EMS side of the department, and they brought a suit in New York State Supreme Court alleging discriminatory violations under state law. And the matter went on for several years. Ultimately, we were able to negotiate a settlement for those women that included not only recovery of loss of pay for those individuals, but it made some equitable changes in the way that hiring and promotions happened within the EMS.
And you also had run for office twice. So we just talked with Andrew a few minutes ago. We're going to talk to Manhattan Borough President Gale Brewer in just a few minutes.
Sure.
From your campaign. No, you're looking at me like I'm going to ask you a tough question. I'm just curious. What was the most challenging part of a campaign? Because I worked with Controller Bill Thompson on his, and David Patterson on his.
Yep.
What for you was the most challenging part?
That's right. You did work with David Patterson. I forget when he ran for lieutenant governor. That's right. Well, running for office is a difficult thing. I think I would encourage anybody who thinks about it to do it. It was an incredible process. I learned a lot. I think part of it is I tend, believe it or not, to be a little bit of an optimist. So I think about government in a very optimistic way. I think running for office and kind of getting down in the trenches with that process taught me a little bit about kind of how the sausage is made in a way. And so I don't want to say it disillusioned me, but it gave me a better sense of how politics operates. And, I think that you have to continue to have that kind of optimism, but you learn a sense of pragmatism. I think it taught me pragmatism. And listen, I love being a civil rights attorney. I get to do important work, and I think any branch of government, whether it's judicial, legislative, or executive, is important. And I think you learn to kind of fly like a butterfly, sting like a bee, and when the legislative channel can help you, you pursue the legislative channel. When the judicial branch can help you, you pursue that. I think my interest has always been about social justice, and I got involved in the political piece because I was an attorney working and volunteering with the New York City chapter of the National Lawyers Guild back during the 2004 Republican National Convention protests that were happening throughout Manhattan, throughout New York City, and I was watching people just kind of getting rounded up in nets and arrested for no reason at all other than being in the wrong place in the wrong time, and that was kind of this heartbreaking also experience for me as an optimist, and I thought, I need to do more, and maybe the political branch of government could help, make some changes that stop this from happening. So that began a journey.
And I seem to recall from one of your campaigns that, you talk about getting down in the trenches. I also feel like my memory is you didn't want to go negative. Right. And so many of the campaigns, you think of Andrew Gounardes and how, bitter at points the debates have been. Yeah. And you just would not go down that road. And that's what impressed me.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Yeah. Well,
I didn't vote for you. I wasn't in your district.
Nor would you if you were in my district, perhaps. But I think what's interesting about Andrew's race also is, so he ran once. I think he got, I want to say 40% or maybe a little bit under 40% of the vote. I think it was in 2012. What I really like what he was saying was that there's this whole other group. We have assumptions about Bay Ridge, us New Yorkers, and what the composite is there, whether it's Republican or Democrat. I think we assume it's a much more conservative district. And what I liked about what he was saying was, he's really tapping into kind of voter bases that maybe hadn't come out to the polls or hadn't been energized, that he says, it's a predominantly Democratic district. That's exciting to hear.
And what's interesting is that I was reading a story on NPR Online this morning and how with the general election, with the midterms coming up, they're expecting one of the highest turnouts for a midterm since the 1960s.
Wow.
So, I'm not sure what effect that's going to have on New York City or New York, but most of the people I speak with are saying they're expecting bigger turnout.
No, and this is why I think he can do really well, is because many of us in New York, where it's going to go Democrat, it's not like we're having the choice of electing a Democrat in Congress or flipping a congressional seat. People want to do something. They want to get to the polling booths. They want to vote. And so they're going to come out on local races and do something.
So we are now up to our second guest, someone who you and I have worked with for a number of years on a number of issues. Our second guest today is Gale Brewer, the 27th Borough President of Manhattan. Gale took office in 2014, was previously on the New York City Council for 12 years, and she chaired the council's technology committee and led the government operations committee. As borough president, we've witnessed that she's focused on quality of life issues, spearheaded community planning initiatives and zoning issues, and weighed in on land use matters in the borough. Madam Borough President, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much. I hope it's quiet enough. I'm in a school with New York Cares, but I am delighted to talk to you.
It's just like you, because being a former Upper West Side resident, I noticed you were you never slept. You were everywhere.
Yeah.
You didn't sleep on weekends.
Yeah.
I sleep.
So it was, I want to get right to the news from this week, and it was disclosed that you're forming or formed a committee to defeat 2 public referenda on the November 6th general election ballot. What are you opposing and why?
Number 2 and number 3, we will be voting on them in the November 6, 2018 election on the second side of the ballot. One is Civic Engagement Commission, which I am against. This is a commission that is 100% mayor-controlled. It will supposedly supply resources to community boards, but some of those resources the community boards would like to have to say about, not a mayor-controlled Civic Engagement Commission. It sounds great, but I worry that it is too vague and it doesn't actually do what it is supposed to do. Number 2, I am against term limits for community boards, and that is number 3. And the reason I'm against term limits for community boards is that in the Borough of Manhattan, for instance, we have turned over 60% of the members in my 5 years that I've been borough president. But I do not throw the baby out with the bathwater. What you need on a community board, particularly in 2018, 2019, going forward, is land use and zoning expertise.
Yeah.
That takes a great deal of time. You are not learning, any of us, zoning quickly. The land use issues are complicated. As you know, there's a lot of development going on. It has to be done right. And the land use attorneys, engineers, and developers working for the developers, they do not have term limits. So it's very, very important to have that expertise, and expertise also on liquor authority applications, and expertise on what our neighborhood was. We all should put on new members. I'm all for that, and I've done it. But it has to be done in a way that retains the long-term expertise. And if you have the kind of proposal that the Mayor's Commission is making, number 3, it is a bad idea, and vote no on number 3. I'm really pleased that 4 out of the 5 borough presidents signed the letter, and they, too, do not want term limits for community board members. There's no term limits for federal officials. There's no term limit for state officials. Why should we have them for the volunteers who make our communities better and work really hard to do so? And there are term limits, as we know, for city officials like me and others. We do the appointments. We can change. We can make changes. We just shouldn't do it and throw the baby out with the bathwater and all that institutional memory.
And you mentioned the letter a few moments ago, so I just want to point out to listeners, it was Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams was the borough president who didn't sign on to that letter.
Correct.
It just feels as if these ballot initiatives were rushed, that it just happened suddenly. Was there much forethought? How early should this process have started?
Well, the process was definitely rushed. The meetings were held. It was just not even a year. The meetings were held during the day in some cases. They were made the decision during August when many people are away, and it's all going on the ballot in a couple of weeks. The difference, there's a definite difference between this Charter Revision Commission, which was not looking at the entire charter, and a Charter Revision Commission, which with the City Council Speaker, Public Advocate, and myself, we initiated. So there's another Charter Revision Commission looking at the entire charter, land use, zoning, budgeting, anything people want, and that'll be on the ballot in November 2019. So you have all New Yorkers have a great deal of time to have their input. That is appointed by Public Advocate, Borough President, Controller, Mayor, Public Advocate, City Council. That's a real diverse group.
So
that, as an example, has many hearings. The Manhattan hearing started at 6 p.m. and went to 1 a.m.
And you're
Lots of input.
And you're forming a committee. What's the committee going to be doing over the next 2 weeks?
The committee says basically, no on 2, on 3, vote no on 2 and 3. And we're raising money to be able to have ads and explain to people that just because it says civic and just because it says term limits, it's not a good thing. Vote no on these 2 proposals. because I don't think they're in the best interest of New Yorkers.
Mm-hmm.
And just a few moments ago, Yetta and I were speaking about the expected higher turnout for the midterm elections on November 6th. So do you think that, if more people are turning out and yet they're uninformed on these ballot measures, that it might make them easier to pass, or that they might not be confronted with something and just not even vote one way or the other since they don't have that information?
Well, it is hard to get people to turn the ballot over. That's a challenge no matter what the referendum is. But we're doing our best to be able to tell people, and obviously the community board members are with us, and people who know what community input is all about. We're doing our best to be able to tell people that these are two proposals, though sound good in name, are not good for the community as a whole. So that's why we're having a committee. Lots of people have joined it to be able to tell people that this is not a good idea.
You raise this is Yetta, you raise an interesting point, which is people who may not have that information when they go into the voting polls, into the booths this time around, will think back to a number of years ago when there was a big referendum on term limits in city council, and they may just think, we object to an extension of term limits, and not realize the nuances that you're talking about, the importance of institutional knowledge that these community board members have.
No, I think it's true, and I know that there's a lot of turnover in the city council, as you know really well, Yetta and Jeff, but the issue is on the volunteer level. It's a very different situation because you do need to, you're not full-time, you're doing a service for the community, and you don't need to have a term limit if you're going to put the time in 10, 12, 20 years. Joe Resticcia is my poster person. He is on board since 1982. I can tell you that the Clinton-Chelsea area has benefited from his knowledge of affordable housing, zoning. He keeps low-income housing there. Preservation and new because of his expertise.
Yeah, and a lot of times elected officials are able to rely on that institutional knowledge on a localized level where you have volunteers who really just know the issues on a micro level that is very important to be able to act on a citywide or borough-wide level.
Yeah, and projects take a long time. When I had to do a recreation center on 59th Street and 60th Street, we started with Councilmember Ronnie Eldridge and went all the way through. It took 14 years to put the funding together, millions, in order to renovate that. And that institutional memory at the community board was invaluable.
Yeah.
So, Madam Borough President, just overnight, some news broke about, of course, election news, about Kirsten Gillibrand canceling a debate or saying she will not participate in a debate on Spectrum New York One News with her competitor because of the ongoing labor dispute involving Charter Communications. I believe Tish James has also said this, and that she will not debate at this point on New York One. What's your position on this?
I feel very strongly and agree with them. I would not cross that picket line. I have been supportive of this particular strike, speaking at their rallies. I don't know how many times in the past. They've been on strike for over a year. They have a very, to me, logical request in terms of their demands on the union side. I've had personal, I don't know if you call it interactions, fights, arguments with the president of management several times, even so much so that he came to my office to try to explain his position because I screamed so loud at him at a public event. So I am very, very supportive of these individuals. They have, been miraculous in extending, and I think this is the last wedge. I mean, none of us are going to cross that picket line, although we love New York One and the work that Road to City Hall and Cheryl Wills and Errol Lewis and the entire team does.
Yes, certainly. Changing the topic just a little bit, I know you mentioned a couple of times the importance of your work with regards to development that's happening in the city of New York, and I know as a city council member you had been on the forefront of the fight for affordable housing. I got to work with you at many junctures. I wonder if you can tell our listeners, in your role as a borough president, how has that advocacy changed, or how is it the same from when you were a city council member?
Well, in the borough president, we have a role in the Uniform Land Use Review Procedure, as you know, it's called ULURP. So whether it's the rezoning in East Harlem or the rezoning in Inwood or the fight right now for ULURP in the Two Bridges area between the Manhattan Bridge and the Williamsburg Bridge. We're constantly fighting for, not just the required, in some cases, 25%, but 50% or more. It's a fight.
Yeah.
And also, what is the average income that individual must have in order to go into those buildings? Because, to be honest with you, I don't think we're solving the homeless crisis at all with what we call the AMI for these incomes in the building. So it's it keeps me awake at night and angry, to be honest with you, all the time, that we have to fight for the new, and then we have to preserve that exists. We obviously have lost, as the controller has stated, and Berman Center has stated, thousands of affordable units in terms of rent stabilization, because we didn't keep lawyers like you and others at the side of tenants as they get harassed.
Yeah, it's been a
that's the problem.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of the issue of homeless, I just saw a statistic that showed just double digits New York City leads, unfortunately, in homelessness across the country and in some of the other larger cities. I know that addressing hunger issues has been a cornerstone of your work as well for years, and I noted that you support the letter grades for food vendors. What's the status of this, and what are the challenges?
Well, I think the letter grades, it's also supported by Urban Justice Center, which is the partner with many of the food vendors. I think it would give people more support for the vendors, because the vendors often, there's always a challenge between the vendor and the bricks and mortar, as we call it. There's a lot of strife. We try to figure out ways where they can work together, because many times the vendor becomes the brick and mortar, and the brick and mortar, small mom and pops, as you know, that's another story, have their own challenges. But I think letter grades for vendors, if it could all be worked out in terms of the regulations, and if it's done fairly, would be a cornerstone of support for vendors. Right now, people are always caught in between, so to speak, between the vendors and the dialogue. Vendors are important also because in many cases, particularly Manhattan, the food choices in the area, particularly Midtown, are so expensive.
Yeah.
And the vendors offer not only a price point, but also good food. So, we're all trying to figure out ways the vendors can be supported, not be challenging to the bricks and mortar, but making sure that they have possibilities to get more support from the general public. And I think that the letter grade would help.
So, Madam Borough President, you're in your second term. What are some of the key issues that you hope to address in the remaining years of this term?
Well, one of them is the one that I've always hoped, which is to be accessible. As you know, as Borough President, we have a storefront office at 431 West 125th Street. We're the first Borough President not to be in a tall office building in terms of our district office. And so people walk in and call in, and we have forums there all the time. So I think one of the issues, it's a continuation. It's to show that, government is really there for the people. So that's number one. The second is, I wish I could say it's a new issue, but as Yetta indicated, this issue of affordable housing. Whether it's supporting the residents of NYCHA in any way that we can, that is our number one complaint coming into the office, where the office is located near lots of NYCHA development. And then, preservation and new housing. We just don't build even anew. And then I'm also a big advocate for the public schools. My kids went to public school. I believe strongly in them. In Harlem right now, I'll be honest with you, 50% of the children go to charter schools. So it's really hurting the public schools, the traditional public schools. So we're working hard to try to give them more support. And then finally, we're all figuring out I call it the balance of family and work, but for women in particular, women's issues, how in the world do you figure out in this expensive city to be able to raise a family or to survive as an individual? And how do we make your quality of life better? Sometimes people forget that quality of life for a lot of people can be just as important as some of the other issues I just mentioned. So, that could be just the streets working for the seniors in terms of lack of potholes or the buses coming on time. All of that is what I consider quality of life, and we work really hard on that for everybody.
That's great. And it's great to hear the specifics of your work within Manhattan. Just to take you out a little bit and think about things, I know there's been a lot of discussion about what's happening on a national stage. How has that impacted New York, Manhattan, and politics here locally?
In so many ways. I mean, we've all been to demonstrations on immigration and the Muslim ban and environmental issues. I think I could have a cot at Foley Square almost for the issues that are relevant to rallying about them. But then, everything from, I'm a big techie, as you know, so the FCC has just decided that they might pull all the money for public access. That's not something that's on the front page, but that's outrageous. That's how we get a lot of our news. That's how the public gets to participate in whatever is coming up in terms of internet and other kinds of opportunities that are public. It includes E-rate for the libraries and the schools. So the issue of the FCC's and net neutrality, those are things that are not on the front page, but that impacts everyday lives, although people may not know it. There are the environmental issues. We could end up, as you know, a dirtier country because of what's going on in Washington. Everything to do with low-income New Yorkers. We don't have any Section 8. We used to have at least some. That's another issue. The list is so long. I don't even, I always say to my friends, you don't know all the things. The judges, we all hear about the Supreme Court, but what about all the other federal benches? That is lifetime appointment. It's such a long list. Can't wait to get rid of them.
We've got a minute or two left. We mentioned this being your second term. What's next for you? Will you run for office again, another seat?
I don't know yet. I'm a Manhattan person. I'm not a 5-borough person. So let's see what's available in Manhattan. I'm not going to the 5 boroughs, although I have a lot of respect for the other boroughs. I like my Manhattan.
Your old council seat opens up.
I'm aware of that.
So, how can people learn more about you and your office?
Well, certainly the website, which is just Google Manhattan Borough President. My direct is gbrewer at manhattanbp.nyc.gov, and the phone number is 212-669-8300. And my direct is 8191. And if everybody goes to Facebook or Twitter, you can get my home number, my cell number. I'm very accessible.
Oh, that we know. Madam Borough President Gale Brewer, thank you very much for joining Yetta and me this morning on City Watch.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you.
Great.
So, again, just want to remind our listeners, it is the Fall Fund Drive here at WBAI 99.5 FM. Please call and pledge at 516-620-3602 or go online to give to, that's the number 2, WBAI.org. So, Yetta, we have a few minutes left. And I know Sean, our engineer, has a number of questions for you, but he'd like me to ask them. So listening to Gale Brewer and the issues that she was talking about, especially when it comes to affordable housing, do you think these are going to drive people to the polls, or do you think a lot of what is going to happen is it's going to be influenced by what is happening federally?
It's interesting. It's a good question. What we've been hearing from both of our guests is that the micro and the macro are kind of working together in this election cycle. And I think people are aware of those issues. I think they understand those issues and the progressive values behind ensuring affordable housing, ensuring fair pay, ensuring the quality of life that Gale Brewer talked about, the representation of diversity that Andrew Gounardes talked about. I do think, again, that people are really upset. They're looking nationally at what's happening. And as Gale pointed out, it is having a real-life impact in New York City. And I think that that's galvanizing them to get to the polls. Now, again, they might not be able to vote out a Peter King or whatever Republican elected official there are in different districts, because we luckily have Democratic representation in the New York City area. But it's not as discreet as that. They want to do something. They want to show up. They want to have that democratic process of showing up and voting and being recognized. And so I think they're going to see a large turnout at the polls. And they're going to be thinking about the local issues, but they're going to be responding to what's happening nationally.
I find it interesting that I'm a prime voter. I'm assuming you are a prime voter as well.
I believe I am, yes.
We get every piece of literature.
I do. Even from Republicans. I got a letter from Donald Trump last week. So Melania Trump, excuse me.
Okay. Saying what? Happy birthday. Congrats on your wedding.
It was the strangest thing in the world. It was a pledge card to pledge my loyalty to Donald Trump. It was really quite interesting.
And
I don't know how I got on that mailing list.
What did you do with it?
I took a photo of it. I'm trying to declutter my apartment, so I let go of the actual document, but I do have a photo of it to save.
So what I was getting at also is, I've never felt like I lived in a bubble as much as the moment in 2016, in November 2016, realizing that, at this point, we did not have a Democrat that was elected.
Right.
And so this refueled, I think I've probably missed one primary or election once in my voting career history, but I tell everyone you've got to get out and vote. You've got to be civically engaged.
Yeah.
And if you don't know where your polling site is, go to the Board of Elections or go to the Campaign Finance Board websites and check this out.
Yeah.
But I am still stunned to this day when I do talk with people in my life who do not know that there's an election coming up, that, even locally, that they don't know their local candidates.
And in fact, the majority of people will not vote in the midterm elections, which is something. The other thing I would say, though, on a hopeful note is, and I agree with you, there's this kind of desire to make sure that our institutions are functioning properly and we're showing up and participating in democracy, because we feel like there's been such an assault on that. For those of us in areas where there aren't showdowns between Republicans and Democrats, people can still volunteer for organizations, volunteer for campaigns outside of the New York City area. They can do GOTV stuff. If they have the financial wherewithal, they can make a donation of $10, $20 can make a huge difference in some of these campaigns. So there are things that people can do outside the New York City area, but you're right. We it's a blessing and a curse. We believe ourselves to be in this bubble, and in doing so, we're able to create a sense of community, a sense of progressive values. But what's happening on a national level is impacting each and every one of us on a very real level.
I agree. So another episode of City Watch is coming to a close in just a minute or two. Any final thoughts, Yetta? What's this experience been like for you, being on WBAI 99.5
It's been
FM?
Amazing. Are you asking me to compare it to my experiences at WWRL? Because I will not do that.
This is better.
Okay. All radio is good. I'm a big advocate for radio. It's I grew up listening to old shows like Jack Benny, and public radio was always a part of my upbringing.
So as we close the show, I again would like to thank our two guests, Andrew Gounardes, candidate for State Senate, as well as Manhattan Borough President Gale Brewer, and our very special in-studio guest, my co-host today, Yetta Kurland. High five. Thank you very much. And also thanks to our engineer, Sean Rhodes, for another wonderful performance on the boards. And especially thank you to the listeners for supporting the show. We simply could not do this without your support and generosity. If you missed any part of the show, please go online, look for our archive section. The MP3 download will be available at WBAI.org, and the show will be up and ready online in about 10 minutes and stay up for 90 days. That's it for us. Stay tuned for On the Count and enjoy your weekend.